Welcome to episode 12 of the Lily List podcast, where our goal is to be a handbook for the living. We chat with Chris Lockler, who shares his inspiring journey of self-discovery, overcoming addiction, and making amends. We discuss his struggles with substance abuse, finding purpose in volunteering and helping others via his work with Bearded Villains, Team Rubicon, and the Red Cross Disaster Action Team. He touches on his experience of going through the process of finding hope, learning from his mistakes as a leader, and the importance for people to take immediate action when it comes to community-driven recovery efforts. As always, visit lilylist.com for more information on the podcast and platform. You can also contact us from the website if you have questions or ideas for people or topics you'd like to hear or see on the platform. Thanks for listening. Chris Lockler, thank you for joining Lily List.
Absolutely.
I usually try to start, and I'm trying to do better with the ums and ahs, but I still don't do very well with them. So
Of course, that's the fun of editing.
yeah, I don't edit. I just leave them in. But so I usually start. Give me a little bit of background. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like?
All right. So I was born a Navy brat. My mother, father, stepfather were all Navy aviation, enlisted. So unfortunately, no Mavericks in my family. But I was born in Hickory, North Carolina. And by the time I was old enough to travel, my mother got stationed in Rota, Spain. So I went with her to Rota, Spain. Don't really remember it, of course. Young toddler. I got like one or two vague, foggy memories. Then we moved to Virginia Beach. She was stationed at Oceana. And I was there until about the 5th grade. During that time, she married my stepfather, John Lecter Clark Jr., and she was discharged on medical. So I think she was an E3, when she was discharged. And she now deals with, chronic fatigue, immune dysfunction, fibromyalgia, and a whole list of other crap to go with it. John, of course, stayed in the Navy, became Master Chief Petty Officer. Eventually, when it was time for him to retire, he was such a phenomenal sailor, they gave him his option of posting. So he decided to go to China Lake Naval Air Weapons Testing Center in Ridgecrest, California. So all the way to the other side of the country. And we went out there, lived in the Mojave Desert. I was there from 5th grade to the end of my freshman year in high school. And during that time, the relationship between my mother and stepfather deteriorated. He and I never had a relationship. He made it very clear when I was a child that he just did not care for my existence. And so, whatever. We just lived in the same house for all those years. And, when they separated, my mother came to me. She said, "Hey, do you want to stay here and finish school? Or do you want to go to North Carolina to be close to her family?" Because, like I said, I was born in Hickory. All her family lived here in North Carolina. And being a young, dumb kid living in the middle of the desert with nothing to do, I was like, let's go to North Carolina. And honestly, despite that being the, in the Marvel terms, that key moment that creates the whole new multiverse or whatever, for me, it was probably the worst decision I could have made, but it is the decision I made. And that from that point on, my life ended up to where I am now. And so came here to North Carolina, and the education system was severely behind. So when I got to high school here, they were learning for the first time stuff I'd already had review tests in middle school out in the desert. I gave up several grants that I'd already earned. Being a California resident, moving to North Carolina, I was no longer eligible for those grants. And I got bored. So I started doing drugs. Started off with the usual small stuff, a little pot here, stuff like that. And then by the time I was done with my sophomore year, I'd started moving on to pain pills and cocaine, and basically just stayed in either a downstate or an upstate. My life was party on the weekends, crash all week, party on the weekends, crash all week. And so what would have been my junior year, my mother was trying everything she could to keep me clean and alive. And so she sent me to, I'm trying to remember the order because, like I said, this was very foggy memories because I burned quite a few holes in my brain at that time. But she sent me to Forsyth Middle College. I think it was the first attempt. And this was the very first year that they had this program. So it wasn't well defined. It wasn't very well managed. And it was just a high school kid with a drug problem on a college campus with more access.
Yeah.
So I ended up ODing while I was there.
Wow.
And ended up in a mental care in the hospital because it's still under 18 at the time.
I was going to say, how old were you at that time?
Yeah, it's funny too because years later I ended up with a roommate. Turns out he was in the same program at the same time. And he's like, yeah, I remember them handcuffing you and dragging you out of there. I was like, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah.
I didn't even remember him being there. But, after that, I got cleaned up a bit. And it was during that time that I was in the hospital that I finally kind of came to like, I can't keep doing this. And it wasn't because I wanted to have fun. I was still having a ton of fun as far as a teenager goes, But my mother came to visit. And as she's leaving, I'm looking down the hallway and I just saw her collapse. And that killed me inside. It's like I'm doing this. Like this woman cared for me, loved for me, protected me from my stepfather when he was angry. And, she's done everything in her life that she can do to make my life better. And here I am punishing her for it. So, it was then I was like, I can't keep doing this. But the addiction was still very real. So, I continued on for several years more, just continuing to be an absolute little crap, But I knew in the back of my head that this has got to change. So after that, got out of there. She sent me to a Christian school. Now, I, at the time, like I said, I'd seen my mother collapse and I wanted to change. So I was like, I'm going to be a good Christian boy. This Christianity seems to be working out for quite a few people. Being military, we didn't really have that whole Christian upbringing from childhood like so many people experience. And being that I was very focused on science and especially environmental science when I was younger, science was my religion, I guess you could say. I wanted hard facts, proofs, and that kind of thing. But at this point, I decided, I'm going to give this Christianity thing a try, but I didn't have the same viewpoint as my other classmates. So I remember one morning, one of the teachers says, does anybody have any prayer requests? And I said, I would like to understand why God gave us free will if he just wants us to worship him. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, he could just made us dogs, and dogs absolutely love their masters no matter what. Why didn't he just make us intelligent dogs? And so this set off a whole chain reaction. And it was funny, it's the third morning of class. I go in there, and they tap me on the shoulder and say, will you come to the principal's office? And they hand me my tuition check. They hadn't even cashed it yet. I said, please leave. Please don't show up here again. But they weren't ready to be challenged. They weren't willing to dig deep and help me out at that time because they weren't prepared for that. They had a school full of kids who had been living that lifestyle their whole life, and they just weren't ready for the challenge that I presented. So that was very discouraging at the time. So the next thing is my mother sends me to Tar Heel Challenge Academy. Tar Heel Challenge Academy is one of those, it's a military school, but it's much more aggressive than, say, Oak Ridge. It is you either finish this program or you go to juvie, or, you move from juvie to adult. And that, obviously not everybody there is in that situation because my mother voluntarily signed me up for this program. Problem was, now we're in a closed environment. I have no access to the outside world. And the only medication I can get during my addiction is the medication that is prescribed to me at the time, which I want to say was Adderall or something like that. And the problem is I didn't want the Adderall. I wanted the money so I could, those occasions where I could reach out to the outside world, get a hold of some coke. So I was cheeking my beds and selling it to other students. And eventually I just kind of had a mental breakdown. Now, throughout all these years, I used to self-harm. I would take knives, broken glass, stuff like that, and just kind of nick myself, cut myself in places. Well, I took the little name badge off my chest with the little pin bags and just kind of stuck it in my arm and ripped down my arm. They don't know how to handle this. This is a military school, not a mental health institute. Yeah. So they immediately kicked me out. And at this point, I realized like the only option is to get my GD, get to work. And so I did. I got a GD and went straight to work. Remember my 18th birthday was my very first day of my first I-9 job, And I worked several jobs over the years because, again, it took me a while. I would have periods of sobriety and then I would slip. And then I'd have periods of sobriety and I'd slip. And this went on back and forth for years. I worked at Walmart. I worked at Sears. I worked for the DOT for a year. I had jobs in all manners of things. I was a bouncer for a while. Did a lot of day laboring because, when you don't have a work history and you don't really stay clean, it's about the only thing you can find. And eventually I ended up at GameStop. And it was kind of weird. GameStop's fun. It's all video games and stuff at this point. And at this point, I've made significant progress towards holding on to my sobriety. Now, at this time, I also ended up dating a young woman who we had a fantastic relationship for years. I ended up meeting her because she worked at the same GameStop I did when I first started. And at that point, I was like, not only am I potentially harming my mother, now I've got someone who I care about I could also be doing damage to. So that was it. Like I had to clean up. There was no more excuses for slipping back into bad habits. And so I did. I eventually got cleaned. The relationship obviously didn't work out. I hope she's doing really well and think she went off to Chicago and is an advocate for deaf and their education and whatnot. But, had out at GameStop for 13 years and then, it's GameStop. You're never going to make a career out of GameStop. So eventually I started looking elsewhere, and now I work in manufacturing in the shipping receiving department, and it pays well. Junkie me would have never thought that I could own a home and a car and stuff like this. Like everything then was just as quick as I had to liquidate it to get more drugs. Yeah. And then of course, there was all these years where I'm like, okay, well, I'm not partying all the time. What do I do with my life? And then I got to thinking, I was like, I've been a real shithead for years. I've taken and taken and taken from everyone and everything I could. I've done damage. And so I was like, I got to change this. And so I slowly started getting into what can I do to repay my debt to society, basically. And it started with little stuff. I volunteered at the Forsyth Humane Society. It was like one of the first volunteer organizations I did. And it was fairly fun and whatnot, but I still worked, I couldn't always be there. I couldn't dive into it. And not only that, it was one small organization. It wasn't going to be, this global reaching thing. I wasn't going to make a huge impact on my community by any means. Continued to work and being in local in Winston, going around, going to scenes, came across the beard competition one day at my favorite drinking place. And so I did the beard competition, had a blast, had an absolute blast. And the people who kind of helped throw that together had their own beard competition later on, a much bigger one. So I was like, well, if I had so much fun doing this little one, let me go to the big one. Well, at the time, I was still dealing with social anxiety. And I was still smoking cigarettes. And I would keep going outside to just chain smoke because it was too many people. It was overwhelming. And while I was there, a member of what's called the Bearded Villains kind of talked to me. He says, hey, man, I see you kind of stressed now. How you doing? Yeah. And he told me about beard clubs, and what they do and how they operate more or less. And he invited me to join the Bearded Villains. I had to do this whole hopeful process, but they were sending an invitation to me. And so I did. And I really had fun. I was meeting a bunch of guys from different walks of life, but we all had a common goal, and that was to bring civility and respect to our communities and to help out. And so I was like, this is it. This is my opportunity. This is my chance to pay back all the debt that I've acquired socially. There was places where I could pull from resources of the other brothers and say, hey, I need your help doing this, or let me tag along and help you do whatever it is you need to do. And so I threw myself into it full force. It was very charity and fundraising focused. So then I was like, well, what can I do? I'm seeing all these guys, what they're doing. I'm like, what else can I do? And so I found out, Red Cross, I always thought in my mind, people know Red Cross needs blood, but you always see them at the hurricanes and the flood videos. I was like, what is that? So I found out about it, and they have what's called the Disaster Action Team. So I eventually signed up for that. And so now I am a local responder for the Disaster Action Team for Guilford and Forsyth County. And so I was doing that, but it was, on-call situations. I would show up at somebody's house immediately after a fire or storm, or somebody drives a car through their door, I show up, I help them start a case for the long-term recovery, and then I provide them the means to get somewhere safe for the night. And this is fun. It's good. It's a little bit exhausting because you do have to do a lot of training, and I do overnight responses. So I'm on from like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So, it interrupts my sleep on occasion. And I was like, this could be more I could do. I want to be the guy at the actual hurricane, at the actual flood. But still working, I couldn't really do that with the Red Cross. And somebody at Team Red Cross told me about Team Rubicon. So I looked into Team Rubicon. I was like, well, what is Team Rubicon? And they have a very big focus on utilizing veterans and former first responders. And I'm like, well, I'm from a Navy upbringing. Like, I can understand that structure. I appreciate that structure. I'm not going to be lost in the jargon of it all. And they do. They show up, immediately after a storm, and they work with the local communities to help them rebuild, get on that road to recovery, not stay stagnant and worry about what's happening next. So I absolutely love doing that. Now, of course, with all this, I'm still a member of the Bearded Villains and telling all the guys about it, and, using their resources when I can and helping them with theirs. That eventually my chapter decided to make me a lieutenant of charity and philanthropy. So now, on top of these other things, I am trying to focus the force and effectiveness of my chapter to help with the community. So I really feel like I've went from being an absolute drain on society to now I can legitimately help people. And it's an amazing feeling. Like, it's exhausting. It's tiring. It can hurt. Yeah. But I love it. Absolutely love it.
So there's a lot in there, of course. Going back to the beginning, so your birth father, how did that play out? Where was the separation between that, or the link, I guess, between your birth father and your stepfather?
Yeah, so it's funny is my mother being rather uneducated in childhood, living in a very conservative home, she never really knew how babies were made.
Oh, got it.
And so she decided she wanted to have a kid. And so this is kind of crude and is probably nowhere near what reality happens, but it sounds like she put out an open casting call for the father of her child.
Yeah.
And so a sailor by the name of Kratz, I knew nothing of him. I met him as a child, but of course don't remember. He ended up being my father. And of course, she continued being a single mother for years from that point until she eventually, my stepfather was, I want to say, he was a petty officer of some rank, and she was in his squadron, and they met and, took off on their little romance. And during that time where they were, I think it was like shortly after they got married, or maybe right before they got married, she was discharged. And so, that was the key to that.
When you talk about the challenges you had growing up and how they impacted other people, and then trying to make up for those challenges, which I totally understand, but have you done work to sort of understand yourself and how these experiences growing up led to some of those choices you made, right? So it almost sounds like you're kind of talking about, I've got this debt and now I've got to repay this debt, when at the same time, I don't necessarily, for me personally, I don't look at life as far as there are givers and takers. I think all of us are that to a certain extent, but I don't see it as a ledger or a balance sheet. I think until we sort of fully understand who we are, it becomes difficult to understand others and then kind of make those connections. So is that something you've looked back on, reflected on, understood?
Yeah. And it's funny is as a kid, because of my unique situation, well, probably not unique. I'm sure there's other kids out there end up in the same situation. But like I said, my stepfather didn't care for me. And he also just didn't care for the general civilian populace. So I didn't have friends as a kid. I just didn't, moving all the time, never built those connections with people. People would try to come over and they would see and encounter my stepfather and just like, I don't want to be around this. So I never really had friends. And so I remember, to his credit, he didn't want me to be a socially awkward, inept person. So he and my mother would actually buy books for me to read to basically learn how to be a human, so to speak. How to interact with other people, how to conduct yourself, that kind of thing. And so I read these and I had to, learn certain things from this. I wasn't autistic. I wasn't, but it would be aspects of social life that autistic people would not naturally have.
Yeah.
And, just for me, it was just a lack of interaction with other people that I had to eventually learn these things. So all that being said, eventually I got to the point where now suddenly I have this freedom. Once they separated, I moved to North Carolina. I had this unchecked freedom. And I know that my mother felt guilty for all those years of having me under his purview, basically, And so she kind of didn't rein me in for a couple of years. And, she allowed me to make the mistakes. And that is one thing that I know that I have a massive advantage over many other people who found themselves with addiction. And that is that I had a mother who was willing to go to hell and back to keep me alive and keep me here. And if it hadn't been for her, and if it hadn't been for her finding people to help support her and her support of me, like, there's no telling me, I doubt I would be where I am now. I'd have been a statistic at some point, if she had just said, I can't handle it anymore and cut me loose. So, there's that debt that I owe her. But ultimately, one of the big things is, my stepfather was an asshole, for lack of a better word. And I didn't ever want to be him. Didn't ever want to be like him. I didn't want anybody to look at me and say, oh, I don't want to interact with him. He's unpleasant to be around. So there was always that aspect of me that wanted to be not necessarily a people pleaser, but someone people came to and could enjoy being around. And I used to say it when I didn't fully have the idea formed, that I wanted to be people's rock.
Yeah.
If you needed help, feel free to come to me. I'm going to be there. I'm going to support you, whatever you do. And I think a big part of that is because I knew what it was like to have support. I had my mother's support. I had her friends' support. I had the support of people who did care about me. I just was blind to it at the time. Now, looking back, I can say, oh, if it hadn't been for that support, I wouldn't be where I am. So now I wanted to be that support for someone else. And that wasn't so much of the I owe a debt. It's because that was such an amazing thing that they did. And I can do that for someone else. And even if they don't know it at the time, maybe down the road, they'll see how much of it made, and they'll decide to, the whole, golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated. And maybe that snowballs into more and more people being that support for someone else who needs it down the road.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the first kind of like, how am I going to change my life kind of ideas.
So that's, to me, leading by example, and a lot of what you talked about is leadership. And so you talked about your mother, your stepfather. I'm sure, though, coming out this transitional period between really realizing I've got to do something different and then getting to where you're actually doing something different, were there other people that really, specific people that impacted that, people that showed those leadership qualities that you now maybe took from them and you try to apply to your own life?
Yeah. So, again, I hated my stepfather, but the man was a damn fine sailor. There's a reason he went from being an E1 to a Master Chief Petty Officer. He won several Sailor of the Year awards. It's because he understood how to take responsibility, how to lead from alongside rather than from behind, or, like if he was going to tell you to do something, it was something that you knew that he wasn't unwilling to do himself if necessary. And if he expected a certain result, it was also a result he would hold himself to. So these nuggets of what I say is being a gentleman, those little nuggets I did see from him. And to his credit, again, when they separated, my mother and stepfather, he cheated on her. And so he still felt, he had held a marriage with my mother. He had this agreement with her, and he upheld it to as best he could at this point. He said, I promised to take care of you for the entirety of our lives. So they got legally separated instead of divorced. Mm-hmm. And this way she still had access to his retirement and benefits and this sort of thing. So when he died a few years ago, I don't really remember how many years ago, she was entitled to his thing. It was one of those last things of like, he knew he was wrong, but he also knew what should be right. And he was going to do his damn best to make that right. So I would say that, oddly enough, a lot of these core things, it's weird, what I learned to be and what I learned not to be, a lot of it came from him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, just being in the military, you're going to run into natural born leaders or skilled leaders. So, I learned a few tips and tricks from that over the years. As funny as actually, I remember one summer I went to a couple of YMCA camps for the summer. Parents were dealing with their mess, so they kind of sent me away for a little while. And they're fun and games and stuff like that, but I don't think people realize like they are still trying to teach your kids, outside of that boring classroom academia stuff, how to be people. And it was, it was a fun summer. I had a blast. And I would say that there are a few things that I learned about conflict resolution maybe during that time, because I did actually get into a significant fight with another kid at this thing. That's when I found out also that I can't fight, but I can take a beating and get right back up. But, I'd have to say I have to give a lot of that credit to my stepfather.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a good pivot point. So you've had a really interesting journey thus far. You sound like you sort of found your niche in life for the time being. But as you think about the future, looking at your past, thinking about what you want to be for other people, which you discussed, who you want to be for yourself, one of the things I focus on here is legacy. And I don't know at this point in your life if you're really thinking about your legacy or if you're thinking more just about day to day, week to week, that path you're on. But if you are, do you have a sense of what the future looks like, who you want to be and what you want to leave behind? What is it that people are going to take from you?
Right. So, when it comes to legacy, a lot of people want to have a body of work that people can look back at, or a building with their name on it, something like that. For me, because I don't believe in an afterlife, I feel like our afterlife it boils down to the memory that we left behind with people. And do they continue to talk about you long after you're gone? Do they think of you again over time? I've had people in my life who they're no longer here, and I don't think about them. Maybe because they just weren't that big of an impact on my life, or maybe they just weren't that big of an impact on life. So for me, my legacy is I want that in the future. I want people to continue to talk about me long after I'm gone. But I want the conversation to be something where people want to continue to talk about me, not just, oh yeah, I remember that asshole. I want it to be, yeah, he did these things, he did that, and he helped so many people, and those people went on to help, do this or get involved in that. I don't want a building with my name on it. It'd be nice if there's like a little plaque on a wall in a building where somebody says, oh yeah, Christopher Allen Buttermilk Logan Locklear was in this building at such and such time, that's cool. I like that idea. But long ago, I kind of got over my ego. I realized that not everyone's going to be a rock star. Not everyone, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I wanted to find a new species of fish or something that I was going to name after myself. That was going to be my goal. And then I had a panic attack while snorkeling off the coast in California, and it kind of changed my career identity. I still wanted to be a marine biologist, but I was like, I'm going to do surface level stuff. But then again, lost the grants, didn't really go to school, went to work. So now, my biggest legacy now is I want people to remember what I accomplished and how it can be used as an example long after I'm gone, to be a subject of conversation. We think about it now. There are so many billions of people who have lived and died, and none of us know who they are. But then there's those few that we always remember. Obviously there's the rock stars, Mozart, he's a rock star as far as I'm concerned. Everyone's going to continue to talk about him for eons. But then you have the other ones who, say Princess Diana, she was a celebrity, but not on that same level as like a rock star. She has no body of work that you can go back and listen to, but everyone knew who she was, what she stood for, what she was doing in life. And I think as far as like it goes, people today still talk about her because we can remember her lifetime still existed within our own. And we will continue to talk about her to the point where the next generation, even though they didn't know her, know of her. Like that would be the ultimate goal for me. To be a point of conversation at a time when I didn't exist in anybody's life, but they still know who I am.
Do you do any mentoring?
So actually, years ago, when I had the fiance, she wanted to have a bunch of kids, and I never wanted to have kids. After we got out of the relationship, I kind of decided, well, I could adopt a kid, because that was a conversation we had. I was like, I'd rather adopt a kid, pull them out of that situation, and give them a steady home. I was like, well, I could still adopt even without a partner. I was like, well, let me dip my toes first. And so I did the Big Brother program. Mm-hmm. No, I don't want any kids. I definitely don't want any kids. I hate that it ended the way it did, because it didn't end as it should have. It kind of was abrupt ending because my career changed or my work changed, and it just didn't suit the situation anymore. So I've done mentoring in that aspect. And I was young. This was still fresh after getting clean. I hadn't been clean for many years at this point. So I was still feeling myself. So to be honest, it may have worked out best in his case because I wasn't quite ready to really do mentorship at that point. But one of the things that Bearded Villains allows me to do is we have what's called hopefuls. People who come who want to be a part of Bearded Villains, but they got to prove that they are made of the stuff that matters. So we have hopeful processes, and you get to be a mentor to a hopeful. And I had a great mentor. His ego has gotten in his way, and he's kind of rubbed a lot of people wrong in the way. But again, just like with my stepfather, there was a lot of good that could be gleaned from what he did. So I've mentored a few hopefuls. So far, I haven't had any of them earn their patch. One was just basically, showed, said he wanted to be a part and then just kind of never showed. And then I had another one. He was doing really well, but, it takes a lot of commitment to become a part of the Bearded Villains, especially during that hopeful period. And he had a family. Family life always comes first before Bearded Villains. We're not a biker club, it's not you got to do our stuff. It's do your life and we'll try to be a part of it. And so it didn't work out for him. And now I'm working on a new hopeful. Trying to take some of the lessons I took from those first two experiences, try to help him become a Bearded Villain. But the other aspect is now that I am a leader in this position of charity and philanthropy, I get frustrated sometimes with my members because they asked me to lead them to do things. And so I'm trying to get them to do the things, but then they just aren't putting forth the effort. So it gets frustrating, and I'm having to learn from other leaders within the organization. How do you handle that? And so, I'm still working on that. So I would say, my mentorship abilities, kind of waver. Like I've still got a lot to learn as far as like being a full on pulling somebody along who doesn't want to get, into the light, so to speak. But I am at least, at the very least, looking for the people who want to be led and helping them. So definitely got a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, sometimes the horse doesn't want to be led, and you gotta just let it go until it's ready. So, the other thing I mentioned, or you mentioned, was not having a belief in the afterlife. So you talked about Red Cross and some of the other work you're doing. So as someone who isn't, I'm guessing since you don't believe in an afterlife, you're either
just straight up atheist.
I was going to say, I was trying to think of something. It's like, no, Buddhist does have reincarnation. And so, but so as an atheist, volunteer work, trying to do good, since, my experience has been so much of that revolves around belief. Do you have challenges with that, or you just accept the kind of, that's how the world works and go from there?
Well, for me, especially here in the South, right? There's a lot of focus on religion and whatnot.
I'll just say quickly, we moved here from Massachusetts. We were in Boston, and honestly, most of the orgs up there are religious based that are doing work up there as well. So,
I guess just being in military environments, it was military force kind of things. But I would say, I don't really like to involve myself personally in the religious adjacent organizations, but I'm more than happy to utilize them. Because the way I look at it, there's no afterlife, but there will be life after me. And so I can do my best to try and improve that future life. And if I got to do some things that, I don't want to do just because I personally don't care for it, but I know it's going to benefit others and it's not going to really do me any harm, then I'm going to utilize the, church, or I'm going to utilize, especially when it comes to fundraising. There's 100 people in a church, but maybe only 5 of them are real go out and do things, but all 100 of them will throw some money at some stuff to say, oh, look, I did some good, I'll utilize, religious organizations. I'll definitely partner with them if I think that the work they're doing is worth doing. And so long as they don't expect me to abide by their, religious beliefs or anything. And I say that, it's kind of funny, is like, so we're getting ready to go as Bearded Villains, we're getting ready to go to Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge in a couple of weeks. And we worked with them in the past. It's not a religious organization, but they're vegans. Nearly militant vegans almost, when you show up there, they don't want you to have any meat foods, no dairy products, nothing like that. Like, try to be vegan while you're there. And we're only going to be there for a couple hours, so that's no big deal. But if they were to say, oh, well, we want you to help us, but you have to be a vegan, then that's a whole nother story. And luckily, I would say with most of the religious organizations, they don't, even if you're there during a short period of time, they don't really like to push a whole lot because they're just happy to have help as well. Obviously they don't want us to rein our language in, no smashing down beer cans or anything, stuff like that. But we do a lot of, or especially myself, any resource that's available to do the work that I want to accomplish. It's open game. I got no problem working with them.
Okay, cool. So where you are today in your life, where are you at with any wills, living wills, medical proxy? If you get hit by a bus and don't die and you're in a coma, do people know your wishes? Is there somebody that can make those decisions?
Yeah, so yes, I feel like most people know, but I haven't done the necessary legwork, right? Okay. So on the back of my motorcycle helmet, I have a sticker that says, "Do not revive. I hate this world." Like, that's the little sticker. But I also know, because I've worked with EMTs, of course, I have some friends who are great EMTs. They're going to do it no matter what. That's their job. Until legally, you get to the doctor.
Legally, they have to do it, yeah.
And, of course, I don't have the legal document, so they're going to try and keep me alive, and then I'm going to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, he's alive. Let's keep him alive because they don't see, so I do need to, my girlfriend, my mother, they know that I don't want to, and I've told my family, I was like, if I'm in a coma, 6 months, if I don't come back in 6 months, pull the plug. I don't want to, because at that point I've atrophied. I don't want to come back and either be mentally damaged because my brain just kind of didn't get the oxygen it needed, or be atrophied and be unable to physically do the things that I know that I should be able to do. And, there's that. And then, I don't really have a will. Like, I know I should, but I don't have any kids and I don't intend to have any kids. So it's not like I got anything to leave to anybody. I do want my friends to take what they want as mementos from my life if they want to. And I want them to help, if in the case my mother is still around before I pass before her, to help her gain as much as she can back out of whatever is left so that she can comfortably deal with it. I've told them, I'm dead. I'm not here anymore. Donate any and everything that can be donated. Send my body off to be a cadaver at a school. I don't care. I'm not there, so do what you need to with it. But again, I haven't done the actual legwork of filling out the necessary paperwork. So, I got a little donor heart on my license or whatever. But right now, I'm kind of putting all that onerous, is that the correct word?
Yeah.
Onto my family to make it happen without the legal document to help them move it along. So, I definitely need to get that in gear.
And it does. It gets figured out. But I always say we never had kids, but, we have pets. And if nothing else, I want to leave instructions so that the pets are going to be taken care of and they're not going to end up with someone I don't think they'd have a good time with or whatever. It's a pain. It's a little bit easier now. There's software and things out there, but
I think my company actually offers like legal support. I just haven't utilized it.
Yep. So, well, where can people track down, what is it, the Bearded Villains and other things? I'll get some links from you. I'll throw in the description, but how can they look you up and find you?
So as far as the Bearded Villains, we are a worldwide organization with chapters all over the world. You can find, obviously, the main Bearded Villains website online, just beardedvillains.com. But we mostly do a lot of our social media on Instagram. So you can find the Bearded Villains Western North Carolina on Instagram. You can find me at the Buttermilk, Budda. And then, of course, many of our other members. When it comes to Team Rubicon, they like to do a lot of social media on Facebook. They'll do videos and stuff like that on Facebook. You can just Google them. They will pop up. They even have a short TV series on Roku TV.
Wow.
Which is really cool. And then with Red Cross, everybody knows who the Red Cross is, but I implore people to please check out the Disaster Action Team. We don't have enough volunteers in that side because people think Red Cross, they think blood.
Yep.
They don't really know what else the Red Cross does. And I got to tell you, I'm tired, man. I'm the only, I'm one of 2 overnight responders, so I'm getting all the calls. It's exhausting. We need a lot more volunteers there. So if anybody's looking for something to do, definitely check it out. And there's actually one other last resort resource that people should check out. I found out about Red Cross through a website called Volunteer Connection. If people are looking for a way to get involved in their community, they can go to this website and it just lists all these opportunities, everything from a single day opportunity to long-term ongoing, like I'm doing with Red Cross and Team Rubicon.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, Chris Lockler, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done. And that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.